Hey, thank you for joining us on today's episode of the Pilgrim's Perspective podcast. This is where we're looking at literally everything from current events to trends, different issues, politics, all of it, but from a Christian's perspective, from a biblical worldview. And I certainly believe that today's episode is going to be a help to you. But before we get into that, in just a moment, I want to go ahead and invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can hit the notification bell, give us a thumbs up, share the episode with somebody that you know would enjoy it. Also, you can follow us on social media, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all of it. We want you to stay up to date with all that's going on right here at the Pilgrim's Perspective podcast. Now let's head into the studio and listen in on today's episode.
All right, so I want to ask you something.
Yeah.
I saw a reel the other day, and AI is everything, and this was an AI reel, but it hit closer to home because what it was a reel of preachers wearing like suspenders and a tie and spitting, screaming, sweating, preaching, but in the congregation it was people like in robes, and it said, "Imagine these preachers preaching in the first century," and really it was a snarky, sarcastic shot at like old time religion. That's what it said over and over again in the thing. But it was those preachers preaching. And it's like, and they use the phrase IFB, and that's really something that's been catching on the last decade, maybe less IFB. Yeah. But what that means is independent, fundamental Baptist. Did you ever see that reel?
I did. You sent it to me.
Should we show them? We might show them. Yeah, I'll let you decide.
All right.
Yeah, we'll think about that. I don't want to give too much street cred to the people that put it out there, to be honest with you. But I thought about that. What does that even mean? Independent, fundamental, Baptist. And we actually had somebody write in, asking us about that topic in a roundabout way. So let's talk about that today. And maybe there's people out there that wonder, what is that? Or what are you? And things of that nature. So let's talk about it.
I do remember when that kind of became a big thing, and there was so much hate going on against, and that's the IFB. And so somebody several weeks ago wrote in this comment and said, I would love for you guys to do a podcast on the divide within the independent movement. It seems that there are two different sects of independent Baptists these days, and they seem to be at odds with one another.
Wow,
true.
Imagine.
Would love your thoughts on why you think this is and which side is right. And he said at the end, anyway, I love the podcast.
I like that.
Bless my heart.
Yeah, that's why he gets his question answered on the show.
Exactly.
But think about this. Remember back to the progressive Christianity episode, and I said the problem with this is that word movement. Movement equals motion, which means change. Anything that's a movement began by men is going to corrupt and change and have division and divide. Right. It's just going to happen. And so right out of the gate, I don't go around always saying like I'm an independent fundamental. I always just say I'm a Bible-believing Christian. I'm a Bible-believing Baptist, capital B. That's what I am, by conviction, by doctrine. I want to line up with whoever lines up closest to the Bible. Exactly. But those words, independent, which is autonomous. We don't have a convention. We don't have any kind of headquarters. We are governed just locally within the assembly of our church, right? It's a pastor and deacons, and then church, votes on things, whatever. But nobody else controls what we do. Yeah. Independent. Fundamental, we talk about sports is the good analogy. You work on your fundamentals, right? You're dribbling, you're passing, whatever, you're shooting, but your fundamentals of the faith. There was that happened over 100 years ago, where they determined the fundamentals of the faith, 5 big fundamentals. We talk about the virgin birth, the vicarious death, victorious resurrection, the verbally inspired scripture, these things. Yeah. But I don't just hold to those things. I believe the entire Bible is fundamental, right? You know what I mean? Yeah, so everything is essential. Fundamentals are essential. So independent, I'm not governed by a convention somewhere else down the road. We're autonomous. Fundamental, we believe the Bible, everything in the Bible, and we're Baptist, right? Baptist. We believe by salvation, by grace through faith. The Bible's our final authority, the autonomy of the local church. There's 2 church ordinances, 2 church offices, the whole acronym of the Baptist. So that's what we are. But independent is where we fail. Yeah. That's what this question is talking about, is that we say that we're independent, but we're not all that independent, or some don't want others to be so independent, I think might be the issue, but we can talk about that. So what was the question again?
All right, so the question is, it seems that there are 2 different sects or 2 different groups of independent Baptists these days, and they seem to be at odds with one another. And so he's asking to give our thoughts on, first question is why this is, and the second is which side is right.
So I don't think that he's wrong on purpose, but I think he's wrong about being two. I think there's 2,000.
I think so. Yeah. There's so many splits and so many.
All these years of traveling, in evangelism and then even traveling to preach as a pastor or whatever, you find out that every week you're in a different, we call them like a different camp, a different circle. And one of the things that I am thankful for that God has allowed me to cross over those circles and not gotten cornered into one little crowd that thinks they're the only ones who are right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because the next week that crowd thinks they're right too. And, anyhow, so there's more than two divides. But probably what he's talking about are those who seem to be more like, what would he say, right wing and then more to the left, probably.
Yeah.
But that's just how it's going to be. We're different. I mean, our church is different than other independent churches within 10 miles of us, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's churches around this country, and there's men that I would have even come in here and preach, but their church is not exactly like ours. And I would go to preach for them, and when I go there, their church isn't exactly like ours as well, but I understand that they are independent. Now, what I don't do is sacrifice my convictions, right? And so if my conscience is clear and my convictions aren't violated, then I can fellowship and then possibly preach as well. And there's some people that I might fellowship with that I wouldn't preach with as well. But, I think the divide comes down to why is it like that? Sometimes it's principle and sometimes it's personal.
Yeah.
I mean, how would you, and how do you ever know? You have to take somebody's word for it, and nobody's ever going to admit it's personal.
Right, yeah.
So you've already lost that battle, But principle, I can see where that comes in because like an independent church, my church here, we believe, and it's in our doctrinal statement, the King James Bible is the inspired, preserved Word of God. That's all we use here. For English-speaking people, it's the King James Bible. So there might be an independent church in some other place that's also an independent Baptist church, but they're not King James only. They use other versions. So I'm not going there, and I'm not having them come here because that just violated something I believe. That a conviction of mine is we have a perfect Bible, right? That's a little bit different than, well, I don't like that. They're friends with this guy, so I'm not going to preach for them, or they support that college. That's personal.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily principle, but, that's where we make our decisions. We draw lines where the Bible does, and if the Bible didn't draw a line there, then that's up to you if you want to, but don't act like the Bible told you to do it. Just admit that there's something else there, right?
So what would you allow, I guess the best way to ask this is what would you allow room for? Like whether you're associating with somebody or fellowship, friendship, whatever, what would you allow? Obviously, I think it would be pretty tight when it comes to principle, but maybe is there a little bit more room when it comes to personal?
Well, some. It's harder on the leader because where I go and what I do also influences the people that come to our church, right? So if there's a place maybe I could go and leave and it not affect my doctrinal statement, it doesn't affect my core values, I could go there knowing there's some things I don't like, leave, no harm, no foul to me. But a weaker brother or sister in our church that sees that, or they might dive further into something that I don't want them to dive into. So I do keep those kind of things in mind. I always told people, I want to be friends with people who give me the liberty to be myself within the bounds of the Bible. I don't want them to impose on me their personal expectation or their standard that's extra biblical. And then if the first time I violate that, they write me off and I'm no longer their friend, then that wasn't friendship anyway.
It wasn't.
So there's people that I'm friends with that aren't exactly like me, and it doesn't make me lose sleep at night. It doesn't bother me a bit. I might have them in, I might not have them in, but it doesn't change the fact that I'm friends with them, right? And they're friends to me. That crowd, though, that demands you to be a mold, like a cookie cutter just out of their mold, and then the moment you break it, they write you off, you don't need that. You need to be self-governed. We have spiritual liberty. We have individual soul liberty. That's a Baptist distinctive as well, correct? And if I'm not violating Scripture, then if you have a problem with it, then it must be it has to be a personal level. Now, you have every right to keep somebody out of your church, right? You have every right to a guest preacher, a singing group, whatever it is, to protect your flock and do that. That's perfectly fine. But we don't want a pope. That's why we're independent.
Exactly.
We don't want a convention. That's why we're independent. But maybe we maybe we get into this as, how did that even happen? Like, where does that come from?
Where did it start?
Yeah,
One?
I don't know if there was ever just one, but I think there is one area that kind of promoted this or caused division. If we're still talking about why is there a divide?
Yeah.
We have a Bible college here. We taught in it just the other day.
Yeah.
You teach in it, I teach in it, others teach in it. We have quite a few students this semester, so I'm not against Christian education in Bible college.
Yeah.
But you see where I'm going with this. I'm afraid that maybe some of these, these man-made institutions that are like parachurch or extra, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that is where a lot of the division has come from, honestly, is, well, I'm of this school or you're of that school, and like, well, I'm of this one, and what about I'm of Christ or I'm of the Bible? And, maybe that's happened a lot to cause a lot of this, I mean.
Could that even be traced all the way back? Because the way you worded that made me think of it. What is it, like 1 Corinthians, where some of the
Paul and Apollos, yeah.
I'm of Apollo, or I'm of Paul. And
others said I'm of Christ.
Exactly.
That's what it was.
Yeah.
And that's a personality cult, right? And that does happen for sure. And honestly, our, I don't want to say our movement, because I don't want to be a part of necessarily a movement. I want to be a biblical Christian. I'm an independent Baptist by conviction. But there have been larger than life individuals, and I don't think that always that individual even wanted this to happen. I just think it's human nature to easily fall into idolatry if they're not careful and follow personality over principle. And so that happened, and I do think people divided along the line of, well, that's mine. This is my favorite preacher. That's my favorite preacher. And so that happened.
I believe people are so quick to maybe latch on to something or link up to something that is successful. And like you said, a larger-than-life persona or a larger-than-life personality comes along, and their church is booming, their ministry is booming, they're successful, and so maybe that's why somebody would link up to a person. But again, we've stressed this before, we don't necessarily link up to a man or a movement.
The principle is what you follow, not the personality, right? I thought about, he said, who's right? Whoever's closest to the Bible is right. So, there are some things, though, you do have to watch against. Like, if I want my church to be a certain type of church, like if by conviction I believe, we need to be distinct and separate from the world and things, then we have every right and cause to separate from things that would lead toward the world, even if it's not as far as other places have gone, right? And so I don't want to build a bridge that would lead my people over into something that would damage our church down the road. So there's some things like I would be comfortable with possibly that we don't necessarily do. Right? Like I could have, like, I love like the Primitive Quartet, and I know that they don't travel together anymore. I understand it's different, but I listen to them. My wife sings a lot of their songs when she does her specials here and things like that. That doesn't bother me a bit, but it might bother somebody else. I don't know, but that's just me personally. So there's some discernment in that to say, like, well, maybe they're not ready. You know what I mean? Or maybe it's not the right time or whatever. If that's just an example. I'm not saying that particular, but just an example.
So, we've talked about this before, not on here, but just personally, like there was something that happened. I think it was before I came here, but it was something big that happened within the independent Baptist movement. And I asked you, or either you just brought it up, but you said, I'm not going to talk about that because of the people in our church. You remember what I'm talking about? And you said, I'm not going to use my pulpit as a whipping post for that, because that would end up doing more harm than it would help our church.
Yeah, and I think some of these divisions only exist in the mind of the preachers. The people in your pews don't care.
They don't get it. Yeah.
They don't need to either, because a lot of this comes down to just like, sometimes it's high school drama playing out in adulthood, so they don't even need to know about it. That's one of the blessings, and I know it, I'll get back to what you asked me, but that's one of the blessings about here, isn't it funny how people will contact me and you sometimes and say, did you hear about this, that, or the other? And I'm like, no. All I've been doing is like teaching Sunday school and preparing sermons.
Exactly.
And you know what I mean? Like we just got our head down doing what and I love it. Like my life is drama free and I want to keep it that way. Man, we have a church here to serve in. Yeah. So like what everybody else is doing is great, but I'm just concerned with what God's doing right here. Absolutely. But that is true. Like, why would you, I don't want to introduce something to our people that they don't need to know about. It doesn't edify them anyway. And if the time comes when they do need to know, to be warned, then we're called to do that as a shepherd.
Right.
But that's up to the shepherd and the Lord to lead the shepherd. That's when we decide to do that. I don't just get up there and say, if you're starting your statement with the words "bless God," you might just want to wait a minute, right? Like bless God. You know what I mean? Because then usually something follows that you probably didn't have to say. Not always, but so yeah, I'm very careful about that. All I want to talk about is God's on His throne, God's working here, souls are being saved here. I mean, we love God here, and that's what we're doing. We have a program to push and promote for God's glory here, and so that's kind of what I'm wrapped up in. But there's definitely a divide, and it's people have their own personal preferences on different things. Like we're for conservative music, but what conservative means to me is not the same thing it means to somebody who went to like one of these more stuffy formal places, right?
Yeah, highbrow.
When I first came here, Brother Frank told me, he said, "Now, Brother Justin, I know we host some big conferences here." He said, but that's not us. He said, "We're just gospel light." And I'll never forget that. And I love that, took that to heart, that we don't have to be just like whatever. We need to be us, right, and how God leads us.
There's a passage in the Gospels, and I'll try to remember it best I can. You'll probably be able to remember it. But the disciples heard or got wind of somebody else that was healing the sick or like raising and they did it in Jesus' name, but they weren't a part of the 12 disciples. And I can't remember exactly what Jesus said, but he basically, something to the effect of, he's doing it in my name, he's doing it for my Father's glory, just leave him alone. Do we see that a lot today? Like there's maybe some groups that aren't exactly like other groups, but they're still doing right. And this is kind of what we've been talking about the whole time, but do we see, does that apply at all today?
Yeah, I would never endorse that, you know what I mean? Like endorse those types of people or groups or whatever like that. I would never do that. That goes back to like the whole, like the Billy Graham, like stuff like that. Like I wouldn't endorse all that because of what comes along in that package.
Right.
But I also am not so naive to where I think I'm the only one who has the gospel right. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
I understand that. But, and honestly, I take care of that by my preaching, or I try to anyway, in my Sunday school hour and my Bible college teaching, where we look at what's right enough to where the people understand what's wrong, where you don't necessarily have to just spend all your time on the internet looking for what's wrong. And that's what they teach people all the time. When counting money, you've heard the illustration. You just study the real thing. Exactly. That way, when something fake comes along, it's easy to distinguish. So we just keep our head buried in the real thing, and then it kind of takes care of itself, right? So I think that's what's important. I think that's the problem sometimes with the internet, is that we are so attached. We talk about separation, and we're the least separated we've ever been ecclesiastically because we're all tied one to another.
Right.
But just keep your focus on God and the Bible. But this division happens for personality. Sometimes it's principle. Sometimes there's things going on behind the scenes that we don't know about, where guys have these vendettas against each other and they divide. There's also different groups within that would use the same label that don't believe the same way. There's some people, that believe in like a mid or even no rapture at all, right? But they would still say that they are independent Baptists, but that's not what we believe. So we are dividing from them, right? There's some within this movement that would say, well, they're a Calvinist, right? So we do our best to divide from that because we believe in whosoever will. There's some that maybe get into more, literal contemporary music, not just like Stomp Your Feet, Stamps Baxter, Southern Gospel. No, but I'm talking about like the rock concert music, and we don't want that. So we divide from that. But here's the thing: when I divide from that, what I do, and this is something I learned from a man who was a leading figure in this movement. He's in heaven now, and a lot of people follow him and whatever. But he would always say, just separate quietly.
Yeah,
and that's what he would teach, and so that's what I would do is, if somebody changes or if something is not what I like, then I do my best. I just don't go there. I just don't follow that. I just don't endorse that. But I don't have to sit there and like spit in their food when I walk out the door. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Now, if they try to bring it to our church, that's a different story. That's when we do that, hit the pulpit, bless God kind of thing, and take our stand, right? But I just want to be above the fray. I talked about George W. Truett on the, I've talked to you about him before. He was a leader in the Southern Baptist Convention, but he was involved in things. He was a mover and a shaker, but he didn't get in the fray. He stayed above the fray, and I never have gone wrong by keeping my mouth shut.
Yeah.
But I've probably made a lot of mistakes by opening it, waiting on God, letting God lead, and usually the person who speaks first, his word's forgotten. but the man who speaks last, who gave it some thought, they'll remember what he had to say.
Wow, that's a good statement right there. I like that. All right, I got two more questions, kind of. The first one would be this: what do you think about some of the groups of independent Baptists that use the label independent to justify their compromise?
Sure.
What do you think about that?
Well, the Bible talks about not using the grace of God as license to be licentious, right? Or your liberty for licentiousness, and that's exactly what that is. Well, I'm independent. Nobody can tell me what to do. I'm like, well, the Bible can tell you what to do, right? And the thing, too, and I like this, sometimes division happens because somebody changed. Like, it isn't that we divided from you. You are not the same. So that actually, you see that a lot nowadays, right? And they change the terminology, and they change the appearance, and they change the sound, and it doesn't take long before they change their scripture, they change their apparel. Everything's different, and then they'll shoot back and say, you're narrow-minded. I'm like, well, you used to be the exact same, and they keep the label. One thing that bothers me about that is some of those people still get asked to preach meetings in solid churches because they still have the label, and people they're not discerning, or they don't investigate or vet. Some missionaries do that and still take support from good churches. They ought not, you know what I mean? But that's a thing too. They use that label independent for license. I'm independent from other congregations, but I'm dependent upon God, and I'm submissive to the scripture.
As a pastor, how much time should be spent? We talk about people who spend all their time on the internet, and like looking at people and trying to find them. But how much time should be spent like vetting people and maybe looking into, well, maybe this person has changed for your job and your leadership role? How much time do you think should be spent?
Well, I think you should probably already have a pretty good idea. The oddball on this would be a missionary maybe that you don't know. But most of the guys that we would bring in would already be personal friends. Or we had been with them in a meeting somewhere, and so you already know, right? And if something has changed, trust me, there's enough police on the internet to sound the alarm where you're going to find out, right? And so that just happens. But these guys are usually not people you just met like through some kind of anonymous chat somewhere and say, come on in and preach. I have people come calling here all the time saying, this is so-and-so, I'm going to be in your area. If you want me to preach a meeting for you, I'm like, no, I really don't. I don't even know who you are. I have no idea. So we have people in that are already, have a track record and a testimony. Somebody I've already made associations with or I've preached for. As far as missionaries go, we research that, of course, where their mission board is, their sending church. If they've been on the field, we ask them. We even have questions like, what Bible translation do you use? Things of that nature. But you do have to give an account to God for who you allow in your pulpit. And so, we need to vet. Now, you can only know so much. Everybody has some things you might not ever know about. But, you do your best to understand who they are.
All right, and the last question is so the two questions were, why is there this divide? Why is there this division? The second question was who was right, which we did say that whoever lines up closest to the Bible, that one is right. But then I want to ask you this: what is the balance between the two? And because I like what you said, there's not really two groups, there's like 2,000, and I get what you're saying. But I think on top of the two groups that this person was talking about, the two sects of independent Baptists, I think there's a third wedged in the middle, and that is the balanced group. That is the group that, I don't know, brings from both sides. You know what I'm saying?
I would like to think that we would be everybody probably want to say this, but honestly, thinking about our meetings that we host here, I would hope that we're balanced, or we're trying to be balanced, because we have like our youth meeting, and it's definitely more camp meeting flavor.
It is,
and the choir's out the top, and I mean, we shout her out, and then we have like our bus conference, and that's very conference flavor, and things like that. We have our preachers retreat, and that's more down home style, like a small country church out there, it's just what it is. So we have a little bit of all that. That's where I want to be, right? I guess that's part of my upbringing too, though. I mean, I'm from West Virginia, so I mean, we always had banjos and guitars and stuff like that. But I also appreciate the organ and the piano and the great hymns of the faith. I love it all, and so I think we need to have a little bit of a balance there. But with preachers, that man makes a decision for himself, and if it's not going to violate my conscience to bring me, if it's not going to harm our people, then I use somebody like that. You know what I mean? It wouldn't bother me a bit. Like not everybody that I have in here to preach is just, actually nobody I have here to preach is like me exactly. You know what I mean?
Right.
And like I said, I go places to preach every other week, and they're not always acting like gospel-like. They are in doctrine, you know what I mean?
Right.
And they are in like their heart for souls. There's a lot of similarities, but I'm talking about the way they do their service, right? Yeah. I've been in some that use like a soundtrack because they don't have a piano player. You know, I wouldn't want to do that here, but that's what they got.
Yeah.
I'm going to go preach there. Don't bother me. You know what I mean? It's just how it is. I've been in some where none of the men wear shirt and ties. They're all these old good old country fellas. That don't bother me. You know what I mean? I'm going to go there and preach. So it's just how it is. So I think it's part of just being comfortable in your own skin.
There you go. Yeah.
God made me. God made you. So you do you, I will do me.
Exactly.
And be in God's will.
And at the end of the day, every individual is going to have to stand before God and give account for what they did.
The thing that bothers me are guys that just throw people away overnight without any benefit of the doubt or counsel. Now, I know a lot of guys that do spend a lot of time counseling and talking and begging and asking guys questions and things, but there's, you know, if you have somebody who will drop you that fast, then don't lose any sleep over it. No. You know what I mean? Because that's not your friend anyhow. If you deserve to be dropped, then you got to lose some sleep over it. But as far as this division goes, I'd tell the man or the lady, whoever it was that wrote in, I wouldn't worry so much about the division. I just dig your heels in, keep your head down, serve God where you're at. Jesus is coming soon. Let's just love him and see what God will do.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today on this episode of the Pilgrim's Perspective Podcast. As always, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel if you want to watch us there, or follow us on your favorite podcast app. That way you can listen on demand at any time, anywhere. Follow us on social media too, and we'll see you next week on the Pilgrim's Perspective.